Hello, good morning, good evening, good lunchtime, whatever it is, wherever you are. Welcome to sunny Edinburgh and another episode of the ITSM Explorers, where we're going to be talking about maturity assessments. This is a stream, guys, so do feel free to let us know where you are. You know, I'm in Edinburgh, so let me know perhaps where you are calling in from. Drop it into the comments. You can also adjust the stream. So we have kind of an agenda going on here, but you can affect that and direct that just by dropping questions into the comments area, or indeed comments, or pressing the emoji buttons for us. It all makes it a little bit more interactive and interesting if you do that. So it's designed to be flexible and to take you where you want to go. So without further ado, though, well, actually, let me first of all point out what we've got at the bottom here, which is a little bit of space. That's where your comments go. So if you are going to drop in a comment, we will see your little lovely face from your LinkedIn profile and your name. So do drop us a comment. We'd love to hear from you. But without further ado, let's bring on my co-host.
Hello.
Hey, Steve. Thanks for joining us.
No problem. My pleasure.
I'm in Edinburgh. You are in
glorious Essex in the southeast of England.
And Michael has joined us from Denmark. So I've never been to Copenhagen. Always wanted to go, but never thought I could afford it, probably.
Place. Beautiful place. I've been to Copenhagen and Roskilde, both beautiful.
Yeah. And Michael, well-known face in the ITSM and SIAM world. And I'm sure you know Michael, do you? Yep, good. Thanks for joining us, Michael. And do feel free to comment as we go along. So for those of you who weren't at the last show, a very, very brief intro to myself and to Steve. So I've been in IT service management for 30 odd years, started off on a service desk, and then moved on from there to do various different roles associated with ITSM, including working for various different vendors, of which, well, one of them is now called Ivanti, but they were called various different names as I worked for them, including Landesk. And then I moved on to work briefly for a ServiceNow supplier, and also now for Freshworks. And I also ran lots of IT service management conferences up in Scotland for 5 years, where I got to see people from all over the place. And while I just remember, Steve, before you do your intro, just to show this is multinational today, the Czech Republic is here, and I'm not going to attempt pronunciation of your name, but I'm afraid that's always the danger when you ask people to pop in and let you know who's calling, and then I can't pronounce the name. Anyway, Steve, an introduction for you.
Hi guys, this will be short and sweet. I'm Steve Morgan. I manage a company called Cinead IT, and we specialize in maturity assessment, IT operating model design, build, implementation, particular deep subject matter knowledge in tool implementation and selection, and also in SIAM as well. So the service integration and management. So yeah, we're here today doing the second of our maturity assessment chats, which Martin will refresh us on shortly. But yeah, I think that's probably about me.
Okay, time for a refresh. So last time on the show, these are the things that we were talking about. Who knew there were so many different types of assessment? I think we spent about 20 minutes going through the different types of assessment, from self-service type assessments that you can download or take live on the web, right through to the type of maturity assessment where you actually engage a consultant for a conversational assessment. And some of the highlights stroke lowlights from that, I guess, we were pointing out that if you do a self-assessment and it's just one person, that's a very individual view of whatever you're doing. If you're taking an assessment which is prefixed. It's a kind of a one size fits all situation. Well, one size that fits all doesn't fit everybody very well. So we're really pointing out that these different types of assessment fulfill different requirements, but some of them are better than others for particular applications. Other things we touched on, ugly babies. Both Steve and I will have had to tell people that baby is ugly on many occasions. It's one of the biggest challenges that you're going to face with any assessment, is going and having a look at an organization and then telling them, oh, you know what, you're not so good here, there, elsewhere. So we looked at the challenges of that. We looked at the type of outcomes that people are aiming for. And in terms of treasure, there is always a surprise or two with every single assessment. And then we talked about scoping the audience and expectations and getting all of those elements right, rather than just trying to boil the whole ocean with an IT service management assessment that covers absolutely everything. It's about targeting and then deciding who your audience is and setting those expectations. So that's a very brief run through of what we got through last time, and it took us an hour. We said it was going to be 45 minutes and we did an hour, and we still had tons of stuff to go. And one of the things we were asking people is, why do you want to take a maturity assessment? And these are the sort of things that people have got as their goal for maturity assessments. Now, from that list, you can see that the goals are all over the place. So I guess that feeds back to our initial point about different types of assessment and aligning those with your goals. Dependent on what you want the outputs to be at the end of the day, you're going to choose a different type of assessment. But our preference clearly is for more consultative based assessments, because that's going to allow you to focus right down on what you want to achieve and then work back from there. Today, we're going to look at this the opposite way round, and I'm going to be jumping in and asking Steve about a few things. But if you're all sitting comfortably, let me press the proceed button. So now we've kind of said, right, there's loads of different assessment types, and what do you want to do in terms of choosing a different assessment type and setting your goals. We're now going to talk about predicting challenges, because there are challenges with every assessment. We've already mentioned the ugly baby challenge, so that's one of the ones. But let's flick on to a couple of other ones. Steve, I'm going to switch over to you because I've been talking. I'm going to get a little bit of tea. Tell us about why stakeholder buy-in is important.
I guess, in order for an assessment to be effective, we've already described about having an assessment that's adaptive and flexible, and therefore you're going to need to talk to people, and you're going to need to have some people who are sponsoring the engagement, and also taking on board and owning the outcomes. And all those different stakeholders need to be on board from the beginning. Um, and often you get barriers put up like, it's not the right time to do it right now, we're really busy on other things, or we're just finishing off some improvement activity, and if you come back in 6 months that'll be a better time to do it. I guess my big takeaway here is, there's never a good time to do these things, and therefore getting the stakeholders on board and understanding that at the outset is really important, because then you can rapidly move through the assessment approach, and it needn't be it's never as painless as people think it's going to be. So yeah, getting those people on board at the outset, identifying those stakeholder groups is absolutely critical.
And is it about sort of aligning, I suppose, your goals with the people who are going to receive the benefits of those goals, and getting those guys involved as stakeholders? So not
Yeah.
just one senior stakeholder, but
No.
a wide range. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody from the practitioners who you're likely to be interviewing, so your service desk agents, third-party supplier resources, service managers, etc., all the way up through the chain of command, through to the IT director, and in some organisations beyond that, particularly where it's an assessment focused on things like value for money, you'll be bringing in, all of those at the top table in the organisation: finance director, COO, etc.
You predicted my next bit of text flying in, which is about resources. Really, I
Mm,
think that a lot of people think that an assessment is just one person downloading some form of spreadsheet and ticking a load of boxes, or wandering around with a clipboard, and
mm.
that's the only resource that they're going to need. In your experience, what sort of resources are required and how many?
Certainly, so this comes back to scope in the first instance, and we touched on that before. But setting an appropriate scope is critical, because once you have that defined, then you can start to derive who the stakeholders are in each of those scope areas. So let's say you covered, I don't know, incident, problem, change, for example, as a common set. Then you'd be wanting to look at the people that are performing those processes, process owners, people that are configuring the tools to support that, people that attend governance forums, etc. So that helps at least identify the stakeholders who are involved. And there are lots of different ways to elicit responses from people that don't involve lots and lots of, you know very, very lengthy meetings. You can use workshops to group people together. You can take representatives from a group and then play back the findings and get people to agree or disagree with those. And I've run in the past, I had one particular client that said, well, you can't see any of our people at all. There's absolutely no time. So we made them, it sounded awful. We we had them stay after work, and we bought them pizza. And it was the enticement of free pizza got us exactly what we wanted, actually, because we turned that pizza evening into a bit of an impromptu workshop, and got us the outcomes that we were looking for. So this needn't be, carving out huge chunks of time for people.
And I guess the pizza's a great idea. That I knew you were a cheapskate, but that's creative thinking.
Really
Uh,
thinking, well, I always love pizza, so
okay.
it was surprising I had a chance to ask any questions at all with a mouthful of pizza most of the time. But I did manage to make the time.
Well, I guess in terms of the group thinking, I love the idea of just bringing a group of people together and
Mm,
sort of nailing it all in a group where you're
mhm.
getting some degree of agreement straight away from the group as well.
Yeah,
And it's also, if you like, it's a mini assessment of itself within the group, because you
yeah,
will get a variety of opinions, and
yeah.
then an average result back that probably is a better reflection than randomly picking one person from a department
Mm,
to interview. And now, of course, we've got due to the pandemic, etc., tools like the sort of thing that we're using today to
yeah,
collaborate on, and the ability to use voting tools and things like that within groups. So we can
mhm,
have online voting. In fact, we'll probably do that at some point. There's a load of great tools out there that will automatically bring stuff in as graphs and
mm,
things like that, and these thought bubble type maps and all sorts. So I think if you can make the assessment interesting to people as well, I think that that's another way of just engaging people, is to not just give them a whole load of questions that you're blindly going to run down, but to
yeah,
actually engage them in a little bit of interest, and maybe even a bit of gamification side of things.
yeah.
Department A has completed all their assessments before Department B, and
Mm,
just get a little bit creative rather than
mm.
just turn up with a list of questions.
I've done a bunch of true or false statements before that I put into a hat and then passed around the room, and then they read it out. And I said something like, the service desk is highly regarded by its customers. True or false? And the person pulls it out the hat and I go, well, I think that's true. And then someone will say, no, I think it's false because of this, this, and this. Or, the ITSM toolset deployed is effective in meeting the needs of the organization. Is that true or is that false? And it's great to get, just some debate going. It need not be a one-to-one interview. I actually quite enjoy some of those group sessions because it does tend to be a little bit more balanced and can be quite a quick way of doing assessment activity as well.
Yeah. And the other thing is that you do get feedback from the group activity rather than
Mm,
just sending something out, which is a piece of paper that effectively they fill in,
yeah,
send it back with a tick box on it.
yeah.
Even if you ask for comments, you
Definitely.
don't tend to get them. So
Well, even if you send a form out, you rarely get a response, right?
I think maybe also you can use to your advantage again some of the potential challenges of
Mm,
individuals as well. Because we
yes.
all know that we have certain individuals and we can predict who they are when we're going to do an assessment who are going to cause trouble for us in one shape or form.
Mm, mm,
So,
mm.
how do you bring those individuals into a group session, knowing that other people in the group will disagree with them and therefore they get a
Yeah.
bit quieter? Is that the
I
way
do
to do
tend
it?
to I do tend to try and adopt that, let the group police themselves rather than me trying to manage a particularly difficult individual. And I guess, you've got to try and understand the reasons why they're exhibiting those behaviors in the first place. There's often some challenges that they have or agenda that they have that maybe you need to address individually with them as well, to try and understand it. And typically we can overcome that. I think the most common one I experience is those that are just overly defensive. So they're in their new role, everything's great, there's not an issue about anything, and then you start delving around, and clearly they don't want you to discover those ugly babies that we were referring to in the first episode.
Mm, okay, I think we're going to come back to that again and again and again. But
I think so.
let's bring on the next text.
Hmm.
Uh, Experienced resources. Where am I coming from this? If I'm going to go interview and talk to a load of people about a load of different subjects, ask one individual, can I possibly know everything about all the subjects? Probably not. I suspect I need to have effectively a mini team of people. So if I go and ask somebody detailed questions about capacity management and they're a capacity management expert and I'm not, I'm not really going to understand what
Uh,
they are telling me in terms of where the problems are or where the problems are not. So
hmm.
how do you approach this as a sort of a mini team, or are you getting people from a client involved in asking some of the questions, or how do you approach that?
I think it's important to ensure that the team has a good balance. So I'm very lucky. For example, in one of my consultants is an ex head of service management in a massive organisation and an ex service desk manager. So she's got, she's my kind of go to, my first name on the team sheet, for want of a better phrase. And then I know I can get her supported with people that have some of those peripheral skills that maybe aren't so common around things like capacity, risk, project management, delivery, etc. So it is ensuring the right blend of team. But no, I certainly wouldn't be shy in getting the customer resources to help, particularly where there was a specific expertise, and that would probably be in areas like architecture, for example. That's quite a specialist subject, particularly now, in the current kind of technological climate we find ourselves in. Um, and therefore, I'd be very happy to admit that I don't understand and get them to teach me those some of those areas. To be honest, those things don't come up too often because in the assessments that I'm doing, we tended not to get too technical. But there are still circumstances where every day is a school day, right? You're always learning.
And I think you bring up an interesting point there, actually, which is more valid than ever today, is that it's quite possible that by the time you get to the end of the assessment that everything's changed because
Mm. Yeah.
cloud infrastructure and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
So I think that you know it means assessments are more necessary more regularly, I guess, if everything's
Mm,
changed a year down the line and you didn't know it was
mm.
going to. It just
No.
happened somehow.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, where we have customers who do repeat assessment activity with us on a cyclical basis, and often they say, "Nothing's changed. We've not progressed any of our processes. We've not documented anything. We've not rolled anything out." But actually, the flip side of that is, well, has the business changed? Because if the business has changed, then it's worthy of doing a reassessment activity, because you might actually find now that the demands of the business are greater than they were previously, and therefore the the outcome of the assessment would have different recommendations, perhaps than it had done previously, even if the process and its maturity hadn't actually evolved much. There's that flip side of it, of what it's actually delivering and to whom.
And I guess that also brings up an interesting topic when we talked about, there's never a good time to do an assessment. Do therefore people always choose a quiet time to do the assessment? And is that the right time to do the assessment? Or
No,
or should you be looking at a peak time when you're stretched to try and assess how you cope when you're stressed?
you can never second guess it, can you? So you can always say, well, traditionally that's a quieter time of year for us, but then we tend to have a little bit of the kiss of death, in that we go in what's believed to be a quiet time, and then some major project comes along, and all of a sudden, the anticipated lack um, of major work coming along is gone. Because we've suddenly come in and started doing an assessment, and all of a sudden external factors come along that change the status quo. But I don't think you can. I think you've just got to do it at an appropriate time. It's like ripping a plaster off, right? You just got to do it and get it done. And it doesn't actually take that long, and actually can help inform a lot of those issues, and in some cases help save a lot of money, as well, where there's particular issues around efficiency or contract costs with third parties, etc., that are uncovered as part of the assessment activity.
Mm. So that's where we go back to there's always an unexpected surprise that pops out.
Mm.
Um,
Hmm.
and quite often I have found the surprise is, we're spending how much?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Really?
we've had that regularly.
How many providers of telephone services have we got? Oh,
Yeah.
would appear we've got 25 contracts with 6 different vendors. How did that
Mm.
happen? Uh,
Yeah.
so those sort of things can pop out of assessments that you just have no idea, sitting in your own little world, of what's
No.
going on in the rest of the organization.
Yeah.
And that can come down to, well, in fact, I'll hold that one for the moment when I talk about the rest of the organization, because I know I've got another slide on that. We'll come back to that. Let's change this one before I get carried away and ruin my flow. Resistance to change. We touched on it vaguely there. I think I would add in there transparency as well. I think you sort of
Mm.
indicated that. There are some people who just don't want to change. Maybe they've been in the role for as long as they can remember, and they're quite happy doing what they're doing, and they just don't want to change. And that's the end of that. You then have the other people who don't want you to know what they're doing, in case what they're doing is not
Mm.
as good as their next door neighbor or equivalent
Yeah.
body within the company. So these people, again, do you seek them out and try and get them on board? How do you approach the resistance to change and transparency?
So the person's attitude or level of defensiveness or level of cooperation, that they have, has absolutely no bearing on whether or not they should be included in the assessment or not. You would agree up front the scope and therefore the relevant stakeholders. And then beyond that, it's just stakeholder management. So I'm never looking to exclude any resources because they're difficult to deal with. We're consultants and we're trained to help overcome that resistance to change through incentivization, helping people see the outcomes that they're going to get, reassurance that this isn't personal, etc., etc. I think inevitably people sometimes do feel a little bit negative towards the assessment outcomes, particularly when you've called their baby ugly. Um, if they've been working on a process for months and months and months and are very proud of it, and then you start picking it apart, then that's not always going to go down well. But one thing I was going to say right at the outset, Martin, is I think with an assessment, it has to be balanced, but inevitably it is going to focus on the negative things, and you have to be prepared for the fact that however receptive you are to that feedback, you will receive some negative feedback, because otherwise the assessment has almost not served its purpose unless it has given you some improvement activity. I've not yet come across an organization where at the end of the assessment, we've got to, the end of it and said, no, that's all right. There isn't, it's a 1-page report because you're all good. There's no recommendations. None of this can be improved. Just carry on as you are. I haven't found that organization yet, regardless of the amount of ITIL badges, ISO 20000 certifications, etc., I see about the place. I'll wait until I come across that organization, and when I do, perhaps that'll be the time to give this job up.
So looking at that sort of back to front, taking the outputs, can you use the potential outputs and likely changes to market the idea of the assessment to the people who are resistant to the changes?
We can certainly talk about what other clients have experienced, what benefits they've experienced as a result of doing it, and what they are therefore likely to see as a result. So things like cost savings. I've made recommendations quite regularly with regards to changes to the operating model that involve different ways of working or additional resources in certain areas. So where I see people who say, I'm way too busy to do this, you don't understand how busy I am. My response to that is, well, actually, the outcome of the assessment could help because it could concur with your opinion and, in fact, make you more efficient or indeed give you more resources to do the role that you are doing. And there's always a benefit to be sold in that respect. The output of an assessment is not just related directly to process. It relates to tooling efficiency and the people and the ways of working, etc., the culture. And it isn't just one-dimensional in that respect. So there's actually a lot to be gained from particularly those types of people who are too busy to do the work, and do not have a positive view of what they're likely to receive.
Yeah, I think I've seen that on several occasions, but I think the problem has been the lack of spinning that round to let them know the type of positive results that could come out, because you don't know what's going to come out until
No,
you've
you
done
don't.
it. So it's
No.
going to have to be from a previous similar example that you're talking about. But
Yeah.
if you can say to them, in Acme Corp, when we did our last one, they ended up adding an extra head to the service desk because they realized that they were so under pressure that mistakes were getting made, stuff was getting missed out, everybody was stressed, so they added an extra head. And then we're flicking back up to the buy-in from key stakeholders. So we can't be making those promises that things will happen for the better unless they actually are going to.
No.
So maybe there's some sort of a top level strap line with regards to making these changes for the better.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Now you get to talk about organizational complexity, because you started to talk about it, and then I thought, hang on, I've got that coming up in a minute. So the reason I put it in was where you're dealing with sort of multinational organizations or multi-location organizations, even in the same country, lots of different languages, lots of different processes in different places, lots of different, I guess, attitudes from different types of people. So if let's say I'm in Thailand, everybody says yes to you, even when the answer should be no in Thailand. So that's a really difficult location to get information out of. So if that was one of your areas, but you were directly comparing it with, let's say, Holland, I use Holland as an extreme example. Everybody in Holland will tell you exactly what they think. Okay, it's a national trait, and you will get brilliant assessment results in Holland because nobody will hide anything. They will all tell you exactly how they feel and what they think. So if I compare those two sets of results in a single assessment, they're just not going to tell me the truth. So how do you start dealing with that's an extreme example, but maybe you ought to start off with simpler examples and then.
I think it's really common though. You don't just get that nationally, internationally, do you? You get that within organisations. Particular character traits and cultures and etc. are going to give you different results. And I think you have to listen to what you're being told and corroborate that what you're being told is the truth through either watching and observing or seeing outcomes and reports and measures that support what you're being told. So, evidence and corroboration are key tools in your toolbox to help you try and normalize what it is that you are hearing. But I think also you have to, with some of the massively complex organizations, acknowledge that there are international differences in terms of their adoption. We've worked with one particular client, the massive household name here in the UK, who also have representation in Germany, for example, and the German folks, surprisingly, and in line with their character, their national character traits, are very precise and would follow the process to the letter, whereas the UK guys are less less disciplined in doing that, maybe in line with their own character traits, who can tell. But in the last episode, I think I upset salesman and well, I can't remember the other big group of people I upset. So I'm trying really hard today not to upset anybody else. But you get the general idea. I think as long as there is evidence and corroboration, sometimes you can accept, you'll have to accept that the differences that you're seeing are valid, they're true, and you reflect that in the output rather than trying to kind of normalize it and dilute it to such an extent that the observations you're seeing are worthless.
I guess also that then harks back to the filling in a form as opposed to having a conversational assessment. So if you are just filling in the form, then the form that's come from Thailand will be extremely positive, and the form that's come from Holland will be extremely negative. So if you have a discussion rather than just a form filling exercise, then you can establish that level of proof and evidence of the answer to the question being the correct answer to the question, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree with you all 100%.
Okay, next one for you. No actions on findings. I've seen this so many times where we're going to run an assessment. Yeah, we finished the assessment. End of story.
Yeah. I find this so frustrating, Martin, because often these are the organisations that say we haven't got the funding to do the assessment, and then they spend hours, days, and days trying to come up with the funding, and then eventually they proudly announce, "Yeah, we've got the funding. We're going to go ahead and do it. This is really important to us." And you've done all the stakeholder management that we mentioned earlier on. You've got everybody on side. You've set the scope. There's a massive amount of excitement, enthusiasm. Well, maybe not so much excitement, enthusiasm. There is for me, but maybe not so much. And you go in there and produce your amazing report, and there's a few ugly babies in there, but it's balanced, and you're really proud of the output, and you go and deliver it. Or I would typically go and deliver it to an IT leadership team or even the board of the organization, depending on where it's being pitched. And one of the things I try to do is say, well, what next then? What are your next steps? All of our assessment reports contain a list of recommendations in a spreadsheet that are actionable, and also a documented roadmap, so they can at least see the key steps along the journey. And that's absolutely critical to get that buy-in at that point, rather than just saying to them, this was the output and this was what we found. That's a bit kind of flat, isn't it? Then I nearly came up with a terrible analogy then, which I'll steer away from. Maybe I'll share it with you later. But everyone who knows me well knows that my analogies are often either fantastic or terrible, and that was they're on at one end of the extreme. But yeah, I think that's the important thing, is those same stakeholders who are trying really hard to get this over the line for you need to be those stakeholders that are then supporting you in ensuring that there is action. Because I can't tell you there's anything more demoralizing than doing all the work, producing a great report with a great set of outcomes that you're sharing with the client and saying, hey, this is the roadmap, this is how you can improve. And then it just falls absolutely flat and nothing happens, regardless, despite your best efforts.
Interesting. Let me press the next button. Hold that thought. So, creating a plan for an assessment. You just mentioned, well, we talked about no actions. Does that need to be in the plan for an assessment, that there is an activity at the end of the assessment, which is, what do you do with the outputs? Where do you build in continuous service improvement? So I guess this is a key for anyone watching who's thinking of doing an assessment. Don't think the assessment finishes at the end of the assessment. I think that's the key message, is there's no point in doing it if you're going to get to the end of it and then just stop. Take the outputs and factor those into a longer term plan for continuous service improvement. I'm assuming you're just going to agree with that, but you can elaborate more.
I'm going to elaborate because I've got a model client that I'll just describe for you, because these guys have been fantastic. So we've just done an assessment piece of work. I won't name them, but we've just done an assessment piece of work for them. It's fair to say that the stakeholders that we were involved in during the assessment were along that whole continuum of supportive versus maybe not quite so bought into the process, right? So we got people who were dotted all the way along there. And we produced the assessment report and went through it all with the leadership team, and they all accepted the outputs of it. And we now have a project manager assigned to managing the recommendations and tracking them on an ongoing basis. We have a small project team that incidentally is made up of some of those stakeholders who perhaps weren't entirely bought in at the beginning. And finally, we have some subject matter expertise that they've bought from me, but other subject matter experts are available to help along the path and validate them. Because one of the other tendencies that you tend to do, so if you come up with a list of recommendations, and this particular client had 66 recommendations, which is not unusual. That is not a high number. It's sometimes there's a tendency to mark the recommendation as complete because there's an artifact to support it, but the quality of the artifact might not necessarily be of the standard that I was envisaging when I said define a major incident management comms plan, for example, right? So they say, oh yeah, we've done that. There's 1 page long. It's a little bit one-dimensional. So I'm now engaged with them on an ongoing basis to validate that what they're doing is of a suitable standard, and to steer it and provide advice at the outset, so that they've got templates, they've got a set of criteria that would justify sign off of that recommendation. So not only have we got a mobilized program team, but we've got tracking and we've got some quality assurance of it as well. And for me, that's brilliant. That is like my model client. And we've also got, to top it all off, little cherry on top of the icing on top of the cake is, um, I'm sorry for those watching overseas, by the way, that analogy probably isn't going to travel. But anyway, you get the idea. Um, is that they have now said, oh, and in 6 months, 9 months, or whatever, we're going to come back and do another assessment so we can measure how we've improved. That's a model client, right? That's fantastic. They were steered a little bit in that direction, but it's great when they welcome that approach with open arms. It just makes my role really, really rewarding, because I like seeing that improvement and helping organisations along that path.
Well, I think that that does sound like a model client, and perhaps that's something we can look at in our next show
Mm,
when we look at the outputs and what do you do with the outputs and continuous service improvement and the different methods or varying methods that you could deploy. You could be asking the assessment consultant to help out with the actual implementation of the things that they've recommended. You could be doing it yourself.
mm,
You could, as you've just described, put together a team and look at monitoring progress. So, I've got some questions on how do you monitor progress, but we're not going to get to those today. But it's a question of how do you say, oh, yeah, we have improved X percent, or things have got quicker, or we're spending less money? What are the factors? What are the KPIs for measuring progress? And how do we do that? Is it just purely a percentage progress on a project management Gantt chart? I don't know. But
mm,
um, that to me is the next stage of an assessment, but it's part of the assessment plan as such.
mm,
So when I
mhm,
talk about putting together a plan for the assessment itself is only the first part.
mm.
And there is a larger part of the iceberg to come, which
Yes.
sits after the assessment and may have multiple assessments in layers within that iceberg as well.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, indeed.
yeah. So we're heading towards our close because I was trying to keep it to 45 minutes today. So let's just flick on to the next slide, which is going to be our final slide after this transition. So it's time for the blatant plug 1 minute at the end of the show, which is here's our contact details. If you're not already connected to us on LinkedIn, then the green box there, get your phone out. We know you've all got your phone, scan the green box, get connected to Steve and myself. I'm also a Freshworks partner. If you want to know about Freshworks software, then you could go talk to me. That's my website at the top with the little dewdrop in multiple colors. And Steve's website is the one directly underneath it. But what you'll also find is a little bit of treasure if you follow that QR code today, because Steve has put together a summary white paper on maturity assessments based upon what we've been talking about in the last show and this show, and what we'll be talking about on the next show. So it's actually quite difficult to point at things when you're on these lives because I always point in the wrong direction. So I've deployed a bot to do it for me there. So
Mm.
if you want to download that white paper, you're not going to have to enter in contact details or anything like that. Just go on the website, follow the QR code, download the paper, and enjoy reading about what we've been talking about. If you want to review the previous show because you didn't see it, then you can look under my LinkedIn profile and you'll find under the um, highlight section that it's got a link to our previous show that we just did. We're also going to be putting these up into YouTube once we've got a little bit more content and chopping them into sort of bingeable, smaller elements so that you can watch 10 or 15 minutes at a time rather than sit and watch us talk for 45 minutes or even an hour all at once. You can just pick out the little bits that you want to. They will be up on YouTube in a couple of weeks' time. They're not there just yet, but they will be. So one of those QR codes in the next few weeks will be taking you to YouTube. In the UK, it's half-term holiday next week. So we're going to take next week off, or some of it off, or at least Steve is going to. Tell everybody where you're going, Steve.
I'm going to Florence in Italy.
So I'm not. So I'm already jealous.
But you're in Edinburgh, so
I'm in Edinburgh.
That's equally beautiful.
We have beautiful. I always say it's sunny Edinburgh, but today it is a beautiful sunny day in Edinburgh. And I guess that's probably the cue for us both to say thank you for joining us from the Czech Republic and from Denmark and from wherever else you've been viewing. And we hope to see you again soon. And do go back and watch the previous version of the show where we couldn't stop talking for a whole hour. So thanks for your time today, guys. And we'll see you again. And cheerio from Scotland.
See you next time.